Let us kick things off immediately with Professor Karol, former head of the WHO Cancer Programme, Dean of Medicine at the University of Buckingham. Karol, a very good morning to you. Welcome.
Morning, Mike.
The papers this morning full of the sort of two stories, I suppose, which are the most important ones. One, this new strain of coronavirus, which frankly doesn't appear to be worth the paper it's written on. And secondly, the Tier 3 lockdown for London, which also, I'm afraid, doesn't appear to be backed up by any sort of serious health and safety data.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm with you on both those. Let's take the mutation. Viruses mutate, we know that. That's not the significant feature. This virus mutated way back in April. Throughout the world, it changed one of its building blocks. It's amino acids on that spike protein that children like growing. And it didn't really change its behavior at all. It changed again in the last month. One amino acid, that's the building block of a protein, changed for another at position 501. So what, as you say? I think it was thrown in by Matt Hancock to sort of try and justify what he's doing with Tier 3, which is crazy. You can't use that to justify, but it's scary to think these mutants are out there. You imagine these old science fiction films and mutants coming down the street for you, you know, the stuff of nightmares. It's not like that at all. As for the data, I mean, you know, I look at the data every day, the government data. They put it on coronavirus.data.gov, and you look it up, and it is pretty poor. First of all, it's not timely. It doesn't come up at 4 o'clock every day. It does sometime. Secondly, there's a huge weekend effect. The data just gets completely messed up. So it's no coincidence that the total number of people said to be in British hospitals is the same for Saturday, Sunday, and Friday. I mean, it can't be that they're exactly the same to the nearest one patient. They've got to have changed over the weekend. And yet that's not recorded for a variety of reasons. But, you know, the only justification for increasing the stringency of control of us is if the hospitals can't cope.
Yeah.
And at the moment, when you look at the data, it's flat line. It's not going up significantly. There are about 12% of all hospital beds in the NHS throughout the UK are occupied by COVID patients. That's all we can say. But it's winter. That's what happens every winter. Patients with all sorts of chest disease, mainly older patients that fail antibiotics in the community, they come into hospital and they're there. So what's different this year? And, you know, that's the problem. Are we making too much of a fuss? I really sympathize with the guys in the hospitality business. You know, my daughter works in it, and it's a complete mess.
Yeah. Well, I was just saying to Julia, I was in a restaurant yesterday afternoon having a business meeting with somebody, very important meeting, very important lunch. And the people that were around me, I thought to myself, these poor people who work in that business, right? Most of them were obviously Europeans. They spoke with accents, you know, they were all very good. But all the people that were waiting, all the people that were behind the bar, everyone there was obviously on a relatively low wage, but they were doing their best to work their way through whatever it was that they needed to do. And I thought to myself as I walked out, I said, I really feel sorry for you guys because tomorrow you're going to close and you don't even know when you're going to be able to make any money again.
And a lot of these guys don't get money unless they do something.
Right.
I mean, it's a gig economy out there for them. It's all right for the public sector. The epidemiologists sitting in their nice lectureships in universities for their nice pensions to come make the rules. Same for the politicians. But these guys are at the rough end of it. And it's not just them. It's all sorts of service workers in the city that, you know, every industry has another one behind it that needs people to service it. So the number of jobs that are going to go over this most incredibly busy period for the hospitality industry, you know, I'd just love to see the data. And if you ask for the data, it's as though you're doing something naughty in church. You're asking if you believe, does God really exist in the church? You know,
well, that's right. And this is the thing: if you don't believe it or you ask questions about it, you're immediately castigated as some kind of, you know, demon who must obviously follow some mad conspiracy theory. Absolute nonsense and rubbish. And the more I watch Chris Whitty, and the more I see of the way that these people actually roll out some of the information they give us, the less actual confidence I have in the fact that they're telling the truth. Chris Whitty looks increasingly to me like some kind of weird, odd character who's never actually stepped out of his house ever to do anything other than, to stroke a tortoise or something. I mean, he's a very odd-looking guy.
No, well, that's not his fault, but he's actually a very good public health guy.
Is he? What's your evidence for that?
Well, with Ebola fever, this is not, of course, Ebola fever. That's where he cut his teeth on epidemiology.
Well, I don't remember being threatened by Ebola in South London, a few years ago, and he seems to think that this is just as bad.
That is the problem. They've taken it to heart and they're going on, but the numbers are not going up. They went down on the 2nd of December, and it's as though we were out of it on the 2nd of December, which would have saved all this. Instead, they've started going up again, but they're plateaued. So I can't believe they went in so quickly. And it was a typical way of doing it. Drop the information over the weekend that maybe we will, the little hints that we could do. And suddenly the virus is mutating. Oh, crikey, better batten down because the storm is coming. Right. And then the next thing you know, midnight tonight, that's it, finished. Restaurants shut.
Yeah, and in other situations when these decisions have been made, the restaurant businesses and the pubs have said, okay, you've given us a few days, we'll deal with it. Today they're saying, we've got all this stock. Because we thought we were going to be open for Christmas, and we've got all this stuff that we can't now sell, which is perishable.
It is ridiculous. And, I get my turkey from Smithfield every year on Christmas Eve. I'm just hoping I can still go.
Right.
Order one, and I'd better go down the supermarket and get them and put it in the freezer in case. Yes, but I think it is just so sad for people that have adapted so well. And that's the one thing I'm full of praise. Everywhere I go, people have done tremendous lengths to adapt to some of the very silly rules that are out there, including who can and can't dine with each other in a restaurant. I mean, made to sit with 5 work colleagues. I went for a snack, a substantial snack, you must understand, but no alcohol at lunchtime. And we had to sit on separate tables. There were 5 of us sitting on separate tables, shouting at each other across the restaurant with a scampi and chips. I mean, it was just the most ridiculous scene, and that's the trouble with this. It's getting the evidence, and there's very little evidence at stake here. Right. And then, of course, and
also the only thing you can conclude, presumably, is that the tier 2 situation, which London was in until we change it tonight, somehow didn't work.
That's right. Does tier 3 really bring any benefits over tier 2? I mean, the aim is to reduce social contact. That's the ultimate aim. So everything, all the little things, the closure time at 11 o'clock, in Wales, the most ridiculous thing where you have the pubs are allowed to open till 6, but they're not allowed to serve any booze. Right. I mean, this is just wonderful. Imagine a little Welsh villager comes into his pub wanting his pint of bitter, and absolutely no chance. He gets a pint of lemonade instead. He's not going to go back the next day. I think that's the problem. It's understanding how people behave. It seems that these politicians don't have a clue, and it's a bit worrying that this should be the case at this late stage in the pandemic.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, one of the things that I've been saying as well about all of these politicians is that they are not just governed by scientists. I mean, I discovered over the weekend that Sage is packed full of what is remarkably sort of referred to as social psychologists, people who are behavioural scientists. I mean, they're not like you. They're not medical people. They don't have a clue about what medical things are good and bad. But what they are good at is making up ridiculous theories about how people will behave depending on what you tell them.
Social psychology is a fascinating business. I never understand it because it doesn't have much evidence base all the time. If you have cancer and you give a drug and the cancer shrinks, you've got an X-ray, you've got a marker in the blood, perhaps you can see what's happening. Right. But in psychology, there's nothing to follow. And so people get theories. And that's what's happened. You're right. Sage is dominated by well-meaning and experienced psychologists that want to change. It's a sort of psychops. Can we change the mindset of the British people?
Right.
And I think
excuse me. Well, before you go any further, Karol, excuse me. Nobody gave them that right. Nobody asked them to change the mindset of the British people. That's not what we voted for. That's not what we had elections for. We do not wish to be bullied and cajoled into thinking in a particular way just because a bunch of bozos who are paid by the public purse think we should.
That's an extreme version, right? But I sympathize with it. I really do. I mean, there's no doubt that they're sitting from a position of comfort, job, security, pension, all these things. No one's going to fire them tomorrow because the restaurant owner decides he's going to call it in and say, I'm packing up for the rest of the year. In fact, I'm packing up forever because this is never going to pay. I'm never going to pay the debt on the rent. I'm just locking up and throwing the keys, leaving the keys behind. That's what's going to happen to a lot of places. There's no alternative when you do this. And, the vaccine program, it'll roll out much slower than we think it will for a variety of reasons. And as we move forward, businesses will reconstruct themselves, and that's what will happen. But a lot of people will lose out, and a lot of effort will have been wasted.
Yes, but also the overriding kind of principle of all of this, right, is that none of it actually works, because if any of it did work, we would be out of it by now. But all of these lockdowns, all of these kind of measures, all of these closing of hospitality businesses has not actually stemmed the flow of the disease. In fact, they're now telling us, it's now mutated. There's a new disease. So actually everything we did before was a complete waste of time.
There's no doubt that the evidence that going between the tiers, it does show some minimal change, but the most important thing is just dampening down social contact in any way possible. And the only way to do that is, if you really want to do it properly, you've got to do it with military style. And that's what other countries have. Asia did it. Singapore, fantastic military style, shut down Korea, Vietnam, these countries, they know how to do it. Even in the Gulf, which again, a crackdown on people really forced into isolation. Here, we've dabbled in it. And, going from tier 2 to tier 3 doesn't really make a big difference as far as I can see, but it causes a lot of unpleasantness and a lot of suffering.
Yeah, because really the only difference between 2 and 3 at this moment in time is hospitality, isn't it? Because everybody else is going to keep the gyms open. They're presumably going to keep the hairdressers open. They're going to keep everything open that they have done in other parts of the country where tier 3 is involved. So the only reason to do it is to stop people going out and having a good time before Christmas. And it just doesn't make any sense to me at all. There is no evidence still, I don't think, Karol, that it spreads in bars and restaurants anyway.
No, there's very little evidence. Very little evidence it spreads in planes. And, that's the place I'd be most worried. But there's no evidence base that, sure, if you sit next to someone that's hot with COVID, it's more likely you'll pick it up. But the evidence that airplane travel and overseas travel actually is increasing the risk of you getting COVID is pretty small, which is surprising perhaps, because there you are confined in a metal tube basically for several hours, and yet no evidence of it. So what's the difference when you go to a restaurant in a nice part of London?
No, exactly right. Now let's talk about the vaccine, because there's a few problems that I'd like to address with you. I spoke to some friends of mine over the weekend who told me that they work in the NHS and they weren't normally going to get the vaccine. However, they ended up getting it because people who were supposed to be given it missed their appointments, didn't show up, and so they started giving it out to more or less anyone. I spoke to Dr. Lawrence Gerlis yesterday, who said if you were at Guy's Hospital last week, you could have got a free vaccine, basically, because they had so many of them and not enough people to give them to. Similarly, we're told that the doctors, this is another Matt Hancock, shall we say, I don't know if I want to say he was being economical with the truth, but he was boasting about the fact that GPs are now giving out the vaccine, where clearly many of them are not able to do so because of either red tape or because they don't have it.
Yeah. So this sort of thing it bedevils our system, and it's because there's so many. It's a divided system. You've got the primary care system, the GPs. You've got secondary care, that's the hospitals, and then the agencies that deal with things. The problem is, they've had 6 months to make up a list of the category 1 people over 70, people frontline in the NHS, make a list and just get it done. It's not difficult, you think. You can bring in the army for distribution. Yeah. You don't need a doctor to administer the vaccine, or you don't need a nurse even. You need a healthcare assistant, someone that's trained for a day to give injections can do it. That's the easy bit. They do need to be in a medical environment because people can go wrong. They can have 2 people already have had an anaphylactic shock type say. So you've got to have doctors around and nurses around and so on. So that's all you need. And people need to have a place to sit, maybe have a cup of coffee for a half an hour so they don't rush out. So after half an hour, it's unlikely they'll have any serious effects. So that's the plan. But the trouble is the logistics behind that. There was a lot of argy-bargy about who's paying for it. And GPs are very good at negotiating payment schemes, much better than hospitals. And it was going to be £12.50 when it first was mooted. And I'm sure £12.50 per patient, they would do the shot, basically, and supervise the administration of the shot. I think part of the problem is getting the lists together, getting the patients in the place. And then the thing that's annoyed my colleagues is that where's the vaccine?
Yeah.
So everything's organized, the chairs are there, the church hall is rented, let's get the vaccine. And nothing arrives in a box.
Yeah.
And then you're stuck. And you have to send people home. The vaccine comes the next day. The patients have gone. Let's give it to people that want it, that are out there now, staff and so on. And that's what's happened.
Well, we've got one GP in Southport cancelling 128 appointments, right? We've got another one in Kent cancelling 80 vaccination appointments because they simply don't have the vaccine. Also, if they get the vaccine, they have to be able to administer it within a very relatively short period of time, because if it's out in the open and it's too hot, it doesn't work.
Yeah, so one of the downsides of the Pfizer vaccine, -80, and it can only last a few hours outside that environment. The Oxford one, if it gets a license, which I assume it will next week, that's better. That could put in a normal fridge, and that's much better for developing countries. It's all a matter of logistics, Mike, and we're not great at logistics. I think if the one thing you look back on the last 6 months, the thing that's been dreadful is the government's handling of logistics. They have a minister, and he seems competent. I mean, I heard him speak. He sounds competent, and it's not rocket science immunizing a population.
It's really not. But they don't seem to be very good at very much, I'm afraid. I mean, it's very difficult. It would be easier to pin the tail on the donkey than to find something the government's actually any use at, you know? They seem to be completely and utterly useless at almost everything. But basically, here we are in this place where we knew we were going to be, and yet we are no better off. And it seems to me that they are being led by events rather than judging the events and leading by example.
And not only that, there will be problems with the vaccine. There always are problems. I mean, they don't come immediately. There'll be some side effects we haven't thought of. It'll be scares. And are you confident that these are the guys that can lead you out of it? I'm not so sure.
No.
The other thing they seem to be able to organise is when it comes to voting time, that's impeccably organised for some reason. You know how the people chase you up.
They're very good at that.
But when it comes to this, the logistics are not so cool.
No, you're absolutely right.